It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the relentless Robert Begley and the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
I'm doing great, Andy. I'm ready to swing for the fences in today's show.
Well, we have a fitting subject for that, right? The Bambino, the Sultan of SWAT. The probably the great. I know you're certain on this that Babe Ruth the greatest baseball player of all time, and I'm with you on that. Except I think there's guys like Ty Cobb, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays have to be in the discussion. But I will discuss this, right? Because Babe Ruth was also an extraordinary pitcher. A lot of people don't realize what a great pitcher he was. We'll discuss this, as well as one of the greatest hitters in the history of the game. I think that gives the award to Ruth as the greatest player ever.
Yeah, we'll go through the process and discuss how he transcended and even saved the sport of baseball, which I don't think any of those other ones actually did. So that's another reason that I put him higher than anybody else. You think baseball?
Right.
You think Babe Ruth?
Right. I mean, you're talking saving baseball after the infamous 1919 Black Sox scandal with
That's right.
immortal
Right.
shoeless Joe Jackson, which ended his career, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Babe Ruth is like because he comes out of this very this background where he was a troubled kid, didn't have the best family. Let's start at the beginning. Because he came out of this very troubled childhood, to become this giant. So he's like at the same time as being the greatest baseball player of history, he's just a great American success story. But look.
Yep. Andy, I'll tell you what. Before
let me give you dates. 1895 to 1948, right? Go ahead.
So for me, as a kid who grew up in the Bronx, two blocks away from Yankee Stadium, my first dream in life was to play baseball. I practiced on Babe Ruth Diamond. The field was named after him. We passed Babe Ruth Plaza. I would look at the monument and see this round moon-shaped face with beady eyes that said Babe Ruth, a great ball player, a great American, and a great man. And I gazed at that. It was just steeped in my upbringing, the importance of this man who clearly was dead before I even, way before I was born. But one of the things for me, his impact on me and just generations of people who, sadly, over the decades, it's becoming less and less because just older people are dying off. So I just wanted to start with that to show the impact that this man had on me. And now we can go into, his childhood. We know heroes overcome adversity, right? So you're 7 years old and you're working in your father's bar, drinking beer, and your parents call you incorrigible, and they basically put you away into St. Mary's Industrial School, it's like quasi-orphanage, a home to develop the child's moral character. And over Ruth's childhood, from age 7 to 19, he learns the sport of baseball. His brother Matthias is the one who teaches him every single position. He could throw, he could hit, he could run. These are some reasons, Andy, that I think he's the best, because every aspect of the game he mastered, and nobody else can.
No, I understand. What's unbelievable to me, you're reading about this in his childhood when he was at the industrial St. Mary's Industrial School, and you're right. Brother Matthias was a towering figure in his life in every way, right? He was like 6'6". Yeah. He's a big
6'6", 250.
Yeah, that's a big man. Babe Ruth was playing in the infield. He's playing shortstop. how does a left-hander? Anybody who knows baseball, you gotta like scratch your jaw.
Yeah.
It's very unnatural to be able to throw the ball to first base when you're left-handed from the infield. But Ruth was such a great athlete. I guess he was able to do it. You remember when the Yankees let Don Mattingly play third base once?
Yeah.
Mattingly was also left-handed and a great fielder. You just have to have tremendous dexterity to be able to whirl, and make that left-handed throw to first base. Evidently Ruth was able to do it effectively. Yeah, because you're right. Brother Matthias taught him to play every position. But we should say first, yeah, he was a wild kid. There's no, his parents. Yeah, I guess when your dad's running a saloon and you're drinking beer, growing up, you're in the bar, and he read. I remember reading Bob Considine's biography of the Babe when I was a kid. He would running loose on the Baltimore docks and everything, and they
Mm.
finally sent him to which the school was an orphanage. It sounds more like a reform school to me, but it all worked
Yeah.
out well for the Babe because Brother Matthias was a much more of a father figure, I think, to the Babe than his biological father ever was.
Yeah. And by the time he's 19, he had so mastered the sport that the industrial school invited the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, who were like a second division team. Jack Dunn was his name, the owner. He saw Babe Ruth for 1 hour play, signed him to a contract. And from that contract, he actually also had to be his guardian. So when the other players saw that Dunn had brought in Ruth, they referred to him as Jack's Babe. Okay, so that's where he gets the name. The most heralded nickname in all of sports history is Babe. You don't even need to say his last name. It's just Babe. That's
Right.
it. So now he's on the Baltimore Orioles, February of 1914. And then in the mid-season, the Orioles needed money, so they sold him to the Boston Red Sox. And on July 11th, one reason we're doing the program today is to celebrate like his major league debut. Gets on a train to Boston, gets off the train, pitches, and wins his first game ever, and then goes on to through with the Red Sox 3 championships in 1915, 17, and 18. And he goes from being this incredible pitcher, almost the best in the league, holding major league records, but he could also hit. And he didn't want to just hit once a week as a pitcher or every 4 or 5 days. And so the Red Sox are moving up and winning championships. But after 1919, they sold him to the Yankees for like $4,100. Now Boston needed money. That was the way things were back then. Was that they would sell these players, and but the reason I go into Ruth saving the sport was 1919. The Chicago Black Sox, the gamblers in Chicago fixed the World Series, and people turned away
Was
from
it
the
was
sport.
it Arnold? Was it Arnold Rothstein involved in the fix? I think
Right?
he was a New
Yeah.
York
Yep.
gambler.
Chicago gambler.
Wasn't
Yeah.
he?
Yep, and
Yeah.
Joe Jackson there's a movie, 8 Men Out, that kind of covers that. It's fictionalized, but it covers that team. And so baseball was in a bad state. Then we have the Spanish, the influenza is happening. World
Oh
War
yeah.
One is over. All these different confluence of events coming together. And December 26th, he sells them to the owner sells them to the Yankees. Now, the Yankees owner, Jacob Rupert, owned a brewery, but he was going to be in big trouble because prohibition.
Appropriate for Babe Ruth to play for his
True,
team.
but prohibition came in, so his brewery was in jeopardy, legally, officially. So he needed something, and Ruth comes on the scene. And you say, Andy, you're one of the biggest Yankee fans I know. I mean, the they are known the worldwide over their emblem, their baseball cap, the MY on it, right? But when Ruth came to them, they were losers. They had never won. They
Right.
they had played in like 3 different ballparks. They were just not a professional franchise until Babe Ruth came.
Yep. And I think before we talk about the glory years, players with the Yankees in Murderers
Sure.
Row and all that
Hmm.
legendary stuff out of baseball history. We have to, people who are sports fans, know Babe Ruth as the great slugger that he was. They may not be aware of how great a pitcher he was. And
Hmm.
people who aren't sports fans or baseball fans certainly don't know what a great pitcher he was. Look at some of these numbers, Robert and everybody.
Yep.
In
Hmm.
his career as a left-handed starting pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, mostly, he was 94-46 was his one-loss record. His career ERA was 2.28, which is outstanding. Of course, it's the dead ball era, so there wasn't that many runs
Hmm.
scored. But still, he was an outstanding pitcher. In 1915, he went 18-8. Uh, in 1916, this is great stuff, Robert. He was 23-12. His ERA was 1.75. That's outstanding in any era,
Yeah. Yeah.
as a
Hmm.
pitcher. But he had what really caught my eye when I was getting ready for the show is he went head to head against the great Walter Johnson 5 times. I went 4
Yes.
and 0 in those meetings. Now Walter Johnson, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, the big train,
Big train.
legendary figure. Yeah, it was a big man, powerful, threw hard. Was also known as a real gentleman. And these must have been classic pitchers duels. Ruth won 4-0. Walter Johnson won one of those games, but Ruth got a no decision
Hmm.
in it. He threw 9 shutouts. The Babe threw 9 shutouts in 1916, which was
Yeah.
a record in the American League for left-handed starters until 1978 when Ron Guidry, Gator,
Hmm.
another great
Hmm.
Yankee left-hander, Gator went 25-3 in 1978. Tied. Not only that, everything Ruth does is just giants. It's larger than life. He pitched in the World Series that year. He pitched a 14 inning complete game win. Won the game 2-1.
Wow.
Which is to this day, more than 100 years later, that is the longest any winning pitcher ever pitched in any postseason game, World Series or otherwise. 14 inning
Hmm.
complete game, 2-1
Hmm.
victory in the 1960 World Series. This is legendary stuff. 1917 went 24-13. His ERA was 2.01 with 6 shutouts. 1918 was shortened season, 13-7, 2.22 ERA. These are outstanding numbers. And then one last point. In the World Series, he pitched 29 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings over
Yeah.
several World Series, which was a record until 1960-61 when Whitey Ford. I can remember that. I was just old enough to remember that Whitey Ford broke that record, 29 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in the
Mm.
World Series. They say Babe Ruth was prouder of that than any of his batting achievements. So
It's amazing.
he's
Yeah.
he was an extraordinary pitcher. He was extraordinary. He would have if he had stayed as a pitcher, he would have gone on to be, if he had stayed healthy. Legendary as like Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, Lefty Grove, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball. So it really lends credibility to your claim that you said the other day, hands down, greatest player in baseball history. I mean, how could you argue with
Yeah.
it? How could you argue with it?
He did everything. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because he did everything. And just let's let's take a second, Andy, describe for people who don't know baseball, how hard is it to actually hit a baseball? The pitcher throws it at you 90 miles an hour. You have a fraction of a second, zero point 0.4 seconds to swing and hit it, which means you have to start the bat sooner. You have to understand if it's going to curve, if it's going to go straight. And if you do that successfully, in other words, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you'll still be considered one of the greats. So the hand-eye coordination of hitting a baseball in the right spot, it's staggering. And Ruth honed that skill incredibly.
Yeah, his hand-eye coordination was outstanding. You see the pictures.
Mhm.
The picture we have here is a really good one from the early
Yeah.
days with the Yankees when he was still lean and mean before all the beer and the hot dogs, and the soda, just made him balloon up and became fat. But even more so when you look at those early pictures with the Red Sox, going back to like 1915 when he was like 20 years old. He was a great athlete. to see. He was
Yeah.
tall, lean. He really, later on, of course, he got fat. But yeah, you're right. Hand-eye coordination is so important in hitting the
Mhm.
baseball. Here's a legendary story for you. In fact, John Hersey and I discussed this when we did the show on Michael Jordan as the GOAT. In 1986 when the Celtics had that great team with Larry Bird and a bunch of Hall of Famers, and
Mhm.
they were the greatest basketball team in history at that time. And Michael Jordan in the opening rounds of the playoffs just averaged like 50 against them, and he was extraordinary. But I remember that one of those nights when Jordan scored like 50 against the Celtics, and Larry Bird said, "I didn't think anybody could ever do that to our defense, but MJ
Mhm.
could, and did." But one of those nights at the Boston Garden when MJ was scoring 50, the young Roger Clemens, had a great game at Fenway Park where he struck out, I forget, like 20 guys or something like that. And
Yes. Mhm.
when they mentioned it to Larry Bird after the Celtics had defeated the Bulls in those games, despite Michael Jordan's heroics, Larry Bird immediately responded, "I could get a hit off him." He's gonna love that athletic arrogance. Larry Bird with his 6'9" strike zone, trying to get a hit off of
Right.
Roger Clemens. But great athletes
Right.
have that kind of confidence, and Babe Ruth just exuded it. Dominate the sport. He's legendary for promising sick kids. I'll hit a home run. I'll hit a home run for you, and then
Yeah.
doing it. He had that kind of the larger than life swag. He's swagger. That's the word. He had the
And
swagger.
swagger. Yes.
Yeah, he had the swag. Had that tremendous overweening confidence, and it
Yep.
exuded, and
Yep.
people loved him. They loved
So
the
let's
Babe.
move on to the right. Let's
For
move
the
to the
Yankee
20.
season,
The
Yankee season.
Yankees. Yep.
Well, listen,
1920.
yeah. But let me just say this, Robert,
Yeah.
because Harry Frazee owned the Red Sox back then, right? 1919,
Mhm.
and I think he was a New Yorker, wasn't he? And he was a Broadway producer. I think he needed
No,
money
Nanette.
for
Mhm.
Yeah, needed money. This is ironic because he's a New Yorker producing Broadway musicals, owns the Red Sox, and sells Babe Ruth to the Yankees for however much money so he could put on a Broadway show. There's just some irony in all of
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the Babe comes to New York and the Yankees transform him into a hitter and this is what you're talking about. His home runs and his swagger, his popularity. Credited, I think, properly so for saving the popularity of the sport after the infamous Black Sox scandal in 1990. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we should
And the
mention
first.
people aren't baseball fans. We should mention, like you said, the gamble is fixed in the 1919 World Series. The White Sox had this great team, but they weren't making much money, and they threw the games. The games were fixed, and fix the World Series. You can see why people were disheartened. The shoeless Joe Jackson was a big hero, and say it ain't
Yeah.
so, Joe, legend, and everything.
Mhm.
People's hearts were broken,
Mhm.
and they were disillusioned with baseball. You're right. I think the Babe probably saved the game.
Yeah. So 1920, first year with the Yankees, 54 home runs. People are coming from all over to the Polo Grounds, which is where they played. They share the stadium with the champion New York Giants, now the San Francisco Giants. And next year they make it to the World Series. They lose to the Giants. Following year, 1922, World Series, lose to the Giants. And by that time, the manager Joe McCarthy said, "Get the Yankees out of here. We don't want their fans," because everyone was going to the Yankee games and not to see the New York Giants, even though they were a better team. But Ruth just transformed it. So in 1923 they build their own stadium, which you could see from the Polo Grounds. You could see Yankee Stadium. And here's something significant, Andy. Before this, the parks, you had Ebbets Field, you had the Polo Grounds, you had Fenway Park. Now, in 1923, we have a stadium. This is like the grandeur. Okay, things are expanding. The 20s are starting to roar, and you want to fit in as many people to see this phenomena, Babe Ruth, in this stadium. And 1923, they face the Giants in the World Series, and this time they win in their first season. So
Christening their new stadium. We should
that's right.
mention, it was known ever after as the house that Ruth built.
That's
This,
what I
this
grew
is
up
how
near. Yes,
this,
that's
oh,
yep.
this is
I
how
lived right
larger than
near,
life. This is how
and
larger than life. It was, the house
Yeah,
that the player built, not the owners built, the house that Ruth built.
for
uh,
him specifically. And if we look at like the profit motive, they saw this. They all saw this happening, and it was in conjunction with radio and newspaper coverage. Ruth was Newspapers had a column. What did Babe Ruth do today? All right, like that. That's how much attention he drew to himself, and how much joy he
yeah,
transmitted. To watch him at bat and to see him, his home runs were majestic. They went up and over, not like these line drives that you often see today. You want to talk to that?
yeah. There's a few points. There's a few points I want to make. You talk about the newspaper columns, and we're talking about not just in the New York Daily News or local newspapers. We're talking like in the Spokane, Washington papers, because people
Yes.
all over the country were just fascinated by what Babe Ruth did, and then you saw this phenomenon starting, and I think continues to this day, of people all over the country who either love the Yankees or hate them. You know, and I remember going to college, in South Dakota in the 1970s, and anybody who was a baseball fan, I remember a bunch of kids from Minnesota, who told me, they grew up, they were Yankee fans, and the local Minnesota Twins fans, ostracized them and everything. And Babe Ruth started all of this, and it was continued, with greats like Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle and Reggie Jackson, later on Derek
Yeah.
Jeter, and Mariano Rivera and everything. But yeah, Babe Ruth, and then Lou Gehrig were the start of that phenomenon. And yeah, and I got to say, I watch these sluggers, these great sluggers play. It is a joy, especially when he's on your team. It's not so much a joy when the guys on the other team. But yeah, Ruth hit these towering. He was famous for these towering, like you said, majestic blasts. But I gotta say the line drives are fascinating too, because if you watch somebody like Giancarlo Stanton on the Yankees today, when he connects with them, watch. I mean, it's like you shot a missile. It's out of the
Yeah.
stadium. You got 115 miles an hour off the bat, and it's in the upper deck like in a second. And there's something that's awesome about that too. But yeah, the Babes,
I agree.
obviously you and I. Yeah, there's the Babe shots. Obviously, you were way too young to ever see it play. But yeah, they were reviewed by many observers. So I assume this is true. With towering drives, just their hang time. Their hang time was for a long time, and yeah, they were majestic, and people were just ooh and ah, and they were inspired. And we should mention, Robert, right before the Babe was known as the dead ball era in baseball. And the game was a different game. It was more get runners on, move them around, move them over, get them in. You bunted, you hit and run, you strike, you
Strategy.
try to, yeah, strategy. You try and steal a
Mhm.
base. Uh, Babe Ruth transformed all of that into a slugger's game. And people were impressed and awed by it. There were seasons where he hit more home runs than whole other teams combined.
Yeah.
Right?
Again,
And
this is what I
and
mean by nobody ever did this. One man did this, and it's just staggering. I think it's
yeah,
staggering the way he just towered above the sport in the process of saving it. So you talked about the being in Minnesota and Spokane. Let me just switch just a bit about outside the regular Yankee. His career with the Yankees, he did barnstorming, so if we look at the geography of America, St. Louis was as far west as baseball went, and Washington, D.C. was as far south. But in the off season, the whole month of October, Ruth would get these other players, black and white. He didn't care. He wanted them. He was for free enterprise in this sense. I have a good quote I'll say later on, but he wanted people to see him where they wouldn't have a chance in the prior, without going to New York or even to St. Louis. So he brought baseball west, played in California, and just expanded it. Again, first sports icon. This is another reason that we're calling him here on this program the first sports icon, because he was bigger than the sport. Then he would go into films. He would make films. Andy, sometimes he would wear mascara straight from the shoot, and he'd go out to right field in Yankee Stadium, still with the mascara on. It's like only Babe can get away with that.
right. You're right. And you talk about transforming the sport. A few years before the Babe arrived on the scene, there was a player. I think he played for the Giants, for John McGraw, but I could be misremembering. This goes back because when I was a kid, I was a baseball junkie. Still loved the sport, and I read everything I could on baseball and its heroes. Frank Baker, right? He was known as Home Run Baker because he hit more home runs than anybody else. He led the
Yes.
league with like 12. That's
Yeah.
the 12 home runs. Well, Babe Ruth comes along, he hits 29. When he was more than doubles that. And then he goes on to more than double it again with 59 and 60. And, they said, when he hit his 60th in 1927, what did he say? 60. He said, quote, 60. Let some son of a bitch try and beat that record. Unquote, unquote. And that was a record that lasted for a long time until the steroid era, in the 1990s. So it may still be the all-time home run record for non-drug addicted players because the Babe was addicted to beer and hot dogs. I don't think those are performance enhancing drugs, Robert.
No, well, actually, so if we go to 1925, that was when he had the bellyache heard around the world. He
Right,
missed
right, yeah.
several weeks of the season, didn't perform that well. I think they determined there really wasn't too much beer and hot dogs. I think it was syphilis, but the media kept down a lot of his shenanigans. But he comes back in 26 the next year. He gets a fitness guru to get him into shape. He plays handball. He does all these other things to get into shape for the 26 season, brings the Yankees again to the World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. And that's where the Johnny Sylvester, the kid in the hospital, suffering in the hospital, the classic, now it's almost a cliche when athletes do this, but back then that's how Babe was. He was sincere. He promised to hit a home run for this little boy who's lying in a St. Louis hospital, and does, and just comes through. And his youthful exuberance. He was a kid, in many ways. He never became a full-fledged adult, and he loved being around kids and influencing them.
That's true. Yeah, I was just thinking how important are you to the sports world when you have a bad stomach ache and it's known as the bellyache heard round the world. I mean, everything he does, good or ill, was larger than life. And I didn't know it was syphilis. I figured it wasn't too much beer and hot dogs. I figured it was too much alcohol that caused it. But syphilis, I didn't. But syphilis, we should, John Hersey and I would always, be honestly point out, the flaws of a flawed hero, and I think we should point out Babe's here without getting too much of the gory details. But he was a Hall of Fame baseball player. He was a Hall of Fame carouser. I mean, if there's such a thing, he would be out literally all night in many cases. Oh, not just drinking and everything, but womanizing. I don't know how many women, Babe Ruth had, sexual relations with. And he was married, so I mean, so here are the flaws, and they're larger than life, man. One is the heat of it, and two, related to that, the womanizing when he was married. He got married very young, and to me, it's crazy. Even if you're single and don't have a girlfriend, that what was that private detective who followed him around one night with been hired by the Yankees? Has sex with 6 different women in one night. I mean, even if you're on a text, that strikes me as crazy. But when you're married, I mean, the Babe had his flaws without a doubt, and they're larger than life too. And God knows what he might have done as a player if he actually been more sane, in his personal life. But there's no way to know what he did, what he accomplished. It just makes what he accomplished on the field even more astonishing. They say, Robert, he'd come to the ballpark. Sometimes guys would come to the ballpark hungover from a night binging. They say Babe Ruth sometimes would come to the ballpark drunk from the. He hadn't even gone to sleep. I mean, he'd been in bed with various women, but he hadn't slept, and he was still drunk from the night before and go out, and perform like he performed. It's jaw dropping. How did you do that? It's astonishing. You
Yeah, I
know,
think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
Oh, so
I was
you're
just
a
going
good.
to. You finish your point.
So yeah, somebody's got to talk. I know you're a good friend of my sister, Aline, and you're both ballet, fans, and you're a ballet dancer yourself, Robert. I always thought of you as a Renaissance man. Well, my sister's idol, and I assume one of yours too, Rudolph Nureyev,
Yes.
was the same way. He had extraordinary sexual appetites, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he was
Yeah, it's
bisexual,
true.
and
It's
they
true.
say
Yeah.
he come to a performance, where he hadn't had any sleep. He'd been up all night. I don't know if he was a drinker or not, but they say his sexual appetites were extraordinary. He'd be up all night, having sex with men, women, whatever, and then he put on a brilliant performance. It's like, how does anybody do that? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
your talent and your stamina and just your physical strength and presence to be able to vitality, physical vitality to be able to perform like that, with no sleep, after having sex all night. It's just in the Babe's case, I don't know about Nerea, but in the Babe's case, with copious industrial strength amounts of alcohol. It's the stuff of legends.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
while we're disparaging it, and properly so, as self-destructive behavior, dishonest behavior because he was married, it was still like awed by it. How do you do that? It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So I think in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, he refers to, in the chapters on virtue, he refers to the dissipation, the dissipated man, the overindulgence, food, drink, gambling too, and sex. And Ruth fills that. He perfectly
Yeah,
fills that vice in life, but still was able to give joy to millions and millions of people who had no idea back then. Here's a transformation in today's culture, because he couldn't do that today without being, you know, called out on it. But back then, the media knew many of these things, but they just didn't report it because they just wanted to see him perform on the world stage as a baseball player. And in that sense, it's amazing that he accomplished that much. Imagine if he had good virtues. You know how much more
yeah,
he could have done. If fitness, he like built it into his character and understood, what we consider moral character. I mean, you guys, as a contrast, for instance, Andy, you and John did a fabulous episode on Jackie Robinson, who was
right,
the gold standard for moral character of any athlete ever, and just for
right,
humans. He's as high as you
right.
go. And Ruth is not in that. But let me say something else. Because of his facial features and his big lips, before Jackie Robinson, Ruth was called the N word more than anybody else. He was taunted. He was everything. He had to overcome so many different um, failures. And one of the quotes is that never let a strikeout, never let the fear of striking out prevent you from,
Right, right.
swinging
No,
for the
you're
fences.
right.
And he struck out 1,330 times. Okay. But even his strikeouts were majestic. People will go there just for that as well. So yeah, just wanted to add that
You
point.
go down swinging. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Morally, the Babe he was not the moral paragon that Jackie Robinson was. That's for sure. But just a couple of things. You were talking before about his love of children. One thing we can say for the Babe, getting back to positive points, is that he had a big heart. He was a
Yes.
big-hearted man, and he loved kids. And he and his wife adopted. Right? He adopted. I think he and his first wife adopted a girl, and then his second wife Claire. He Oh yeah,
Well, he got.
was that girl he adopted was supposed to be his illegitimate? Was that his illegitimate
Yes.
daughter?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. That's
And then he
that's how that
adopted,
going.
yeah. And then with his
Mm-hmm.
second wife Claire, who I think helped him mature,
He
calm
did.
down,
Yeah.
live a much.
Yeah.
And she was Claire was certainly a very, very rational force in the babe's life. And he adopted when he married her, second marriage for each. I think he adopted her daughter as well. He loved kids. But you're right. We should. while we were disparaging the Babe for his moral failings, we again have to point out how much he overcame from his childhood, terrible childhood, neglected, tavern, saloon keeper, unloved. They gave him away to put him away
Mhm.
in a reform. What struck me as more of a reform school than an orphanage. But he come up out of nothing, out of this poor, not just an impoverished, but probably love deprived childhood to reach these great achievements in his life. So
Yeah.
the great Ernest Shackleton said, difficulties or obstacles are just things to be overcome. Well, the Babe didn't have to go through the endless race baiting and brutality that Jackie Robinson overcame, but he overcame a great deal to be the greatest baseball player in history as well. So a
Mhm.
lot of positives here in Babe
Yeah.
Ruth's character and in his life to offset much more than offset the negatives.
Yeah. So finishing with the 20s,
We
1927,
got to discuss. We got to discuss Murderers Row, right?
Murderers Row.
Mur-
The Lou Gehrig now comes on the scene. They start wearing numbers because of Ruth. Sports teams never had numbers. They wanted to see his number 3, and Gehrig, because he batted third, and Gehrig batted fourth, and that's why he had that number. The 27 team is recognized as the greatest baseball team ever. Win like 110 games and swept the Pittsburgh Pirates in the World Series. When Lindbergh, you and John talked about Lindbergh in a prior episode. When he came to first period of time, he was the only one more popular than Ruth, and he had planned to come to New York, and the Yankees were to a game at the stadium, but he was delayed because he was doing dinner and lunch and this and that in Manhattan. And Ruth was like, "I'm going to hit one out for for Lindbergh," and he doesn't show up. And Ruth's like, "I can't wait." And first inning hits a home run anyway. So the 2017 was, known. This is the height of the Roaring Twenties, and Ruth was right in. I mean, if you think of the icons, who comes to mind? Lindbergh, maybe Henry Ford. On the negative side, Al Capone. Not too many, individuals do you like say the 20 who made the 20s roar, but Ruth is in that category. So now we're going bigger than baseball itself.
Right, right. The 27 Yankees. So I'm a kid, 1960s baseball fan. Mickey Mantle's a big star on the Yankees then. Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, big stars, in the National League. And I'm reading about baseball history. The 27 Yankees at that time were widely considered to be the greatest team in baseball history. Personally, today I think the 1998 Yankees are the greatest team in history.
Mm-hmm.
125 and 50.
Yeah.
It's a friend of mine who but I won't mention him on the show. He was a brilliant young guy. He's a photographic memory. He's rattling off to me all these numbers from the 27 Yankees because they had all these Hall of Famers, in Murderers Row. And he said the 98 Yankees didn't have those numbers. And I said, yes, they do. And he said, what? I said, 125 and 50. And he said, well, that's all that matters. I mean, 125 and
Yeah.
50 in baseball is just extraordinary. Nevertheless, we can debate that. The 27 Yankees, like you said, were the gold standard. I mean, they had a whole bunch of Hall of Famers. Murderers Row, their lineup. How many Hall of Famers on that team? Was Earl Coombs, Bob Musial,
Tony
Tony
Lazzari,
Lazzari, yeah, Gehrig and Ruth. Obviously, I think all those guys are in the Hall of Fame.
Lefty
All great, all
Grove,
great.
too. I can't
Lefty
remember.
Grove played for the Lefty Grove played for the Philadelphia Athletics. I don't
Okay,
know.
I'm
I don't
sorry.
know. Yeah,
Yeah,
but their pitching was very good. Wade Hoyt was on that team.
right. Wade
Uh,
Hoyt.
Wade Hoyt. What was his name? Bob Shorkey, George Pipgrass. They had a number of really good pitchers. Yeah, they were a great team, but it was their pitching was great, but was overshadowed by their lineup. They
Yeah,
say I don't know if this is legendary, Robert, or if it's true. Now you talked about sweeping the Pirates in the 27 World Series. The opening games were Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, and they said that the Pirate players watching the Yankees take batting practice they were just absolutely dismayed that the power
yeah,
of that
yeah,
team.
yeah. Again,
So they were right. As I said, the series was over before it began. at that
Yep.
point.
Yep.
But
So
yeah,
now
yeah.
moving on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, finishing up with the 20s. Now we move on to the 30s, and America sinks into the Great Depression. But they
Right.
go to see Ruth, okay, and he's still getting paid. We know the famous quote that he made 80,000 a year, and Herbert Hoover, the president, made 75,000. What did Ruth say, Andy? When
Well, this is legendary. I don't know. This may or may not be accurate. I don't know, but the legend is that when somebody said to the Babe, $80,000, the president doesn't make that much money, and Ruth responded, "Well, I had a better year than the president did last year." So,
That's
so again, the swagger, of an immortal, athlete like Babe Ruth.
mm-hmm. So in
Yeah, I love it.
1932, they make it to the World Series again. Chicago Cubs, they play, and the Yanks win the first two at the stadium, and then they're in Chicago for Game 3, and the fans are taunting Ruth mercilessly, and that's the famous. He calls a shot. He gets a strike one, and then he points to center field. He gets strike two, and the bench, everybody is getting on his case. And then before strike three, he hits dead center field, hits a home run too. And again,
Yeah,
this is theater. This is
yeah.
transforming from sports to theater.
Yeah, this is legendary stuff. With
Mm-hmm.
the Babe calling his shot in the '32 World Series. So we should point out. So Charlie Root is pitching for the Cubs. Ruth hit a 3-run homer off him in the first inning, and then the Cubs came back to tie the game. At 4-4. You're right. There was a lot of bad blood between the teams. We're in Chicago now. Not just the Cubs plays, but the fans are all over the Babe. They're yelling, screaming, insults and everything. And again, and you're right. According to legend, the Babe points out to center field and then drills one, out of the park, right there. And nobody knows for sure, if Babe was pointing and if he's called the shot. But I've read where players who had played with Charlie Root for and against said he was such a mean sob that if Root thought that Ruth was actually calling the shot, he would have stuck the next pitch right in his ear. So,
Right. Yeah.
so the story may well be apocryphal, but it's the kind of thing that if this story ain't true, it ought to be,
It ought to be.
because it fits the Babe. It's so larger than life. Fits the Babe perfectly.
Yeah, and also within the span, Wade Hoyt was a um, played with him on Boston, so he saw him as a very young player. Then saw him on the Yankees. So the transformation, the way the man Ruth transformed, and so when you go from just ball player to hero to legend and then to myth, it's so the called shot it's mythical. Whether or not it happened, it should, it makes sense for it to have happened because people want to believe that. They want to
Yeah,
believe that the man was capable of that kind of action because again, this is the depression is setting in. They need something in their life. They want to see some kind of vision. This is what heroes do. I mean, this is what, Andy, you and I, this is why we love heroes so much. We
yeah,
want to
right,
see
absolutely.
human greatness on a massive scale. And that's why I think Ruth, just fits that bill perfectly.
Yeah, you're right. Right. We should mention the great rivalry from around that time with the Philadelphia Athletics because the
Mm.
Yankees won the World Series in 27 and 28. And it's a great team. Uh,
Jimmy Fox. Hmm.
yeah. Connie Mack, the great
Hmm.
Connie Mack, had built by the late 20s, had built another great team with the Philadelphia A's. You're right. Jimmy Fox, old double X, great. It was considered, when I was a kid, he was still considered the greatest right handed hitter
Right-handed
in
hitter.
baseball
Yes.
history. Yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
you had Lefty Grove, one of the greatest pitchers, 300-game winner, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. You had two other Hall of Famers. You had Mickey Cochran, the great catcher, and Al Simmons, another great hitter. All those guys in the Hall of Fame. And they had a great rivalry with the Yankees, 29, 30, 31. The A's won the American League pennant every one of those years, beating out the Ruth Gehrig Yankees. That's how
Mhm.
good the A's won. They won several World Series. I don't remember if the A's won all three, but they won several World Series. And then in '32, the Yankees the Yankees came back to beat out the A's in that American League rivalry, and like you said, beat the Cubs in the 32 World Series, containing the mythical, legendary called shot by Babe Ruth. This is great stuff. If anybody is a sports fan, this doesn't get your heart beating fast. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what would. This is great
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then we're
So
into
his
the decline. The
yeah, his
declining.
skills are diminishing. He can't swing. His eyes are going, which were, the main thing. The legs go usually first for athletes, and then by
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
1935,
He's 40.
hmm?
I mean, he's 40 years old
Yes,
by
yeah,
1935. And so
by
that's
19,
old age for an athlete, so especially
yeah,
back then. Especially for
yep,
him, not just old age, but the endless carousing. My mother was not a paragon of rationality, let me tell you. But one thing she told me that's absolutely true is you can't burn the candle at both ends. And it's
yeah,
amazing how long Babe Ruth was able to do so. Eventually, that and the aging process catches up with you, and the Babe's skills would decline. Must have been sad. Must have been sad for
yeah.
his fans to watch.
Very sad. And the Yankees didn't want. They were kind of fed up with him too. So by 1935, they didn't renew his contract. They offered him a $1 a year contract, and then the Boston Braves wanted him just to boost their attendance because that's what the Yankees didn't. They just didn't. They had a good enough team because actually the 36 Yankees are one of the ones that actually I think rivals the 27 Yankees,
That was Joe
led by.
DiMaggio's rookie season, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's it. So he retires and then moves on to the next phase of his life, and still globally known. But his love is gone because he's unable to do the thing that he was so good at, and so now he's looking in the past. And then we move on to the 40s, World War II. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. The Japanese military were taught one sentence in English: to hell with Babe Ruth. Okay, they weren't saying to hell with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who's the president. Okay, they're not saying to Lindbergh. To hell with Babe Ruth shows you the scale that the reverence for this man by American soldiers, who are fighting against them. So
Right.
again, just transcending the sport here.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing because you're right. That teaching the Japanese soldiers that line supposedly is to express their contempt for American culture and for America. And you're right. So who'd they pick? A baseball player? I mean, not the president, not Douglas MacArthur, not FDR. They picked a retired
Yes.
baseball player. And,
Who actually went to Japan and taught them the game. Okay,
right.
so
That's
that's
right.
like doubly. They saw him there in person, but this is a tragedy.
You reminded me. There was several years ago. There was a relatively low budget film called the Catcher Was a Spy. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was very good. It was about
Mhm.
Mo Berg, who was a catcher in the major leagues, and he was fluent in any number of languages, and he worked for the OSS. It's a great story and based on true events, but it shows the major league players barnstorming in Japan in the 1930s. Babe Ruth was one of them, and as the players are walking into the stadium, the Japanese band is playing, a John Philip Sousa
Mhm.
march.
Mhm.
I can't remember which one was a very famous.
Stars and
There's a very
Stripes forever.
Stars and Stripes, yeah, Stars and Stripes Forever, yeah, yeah, and it's
Mhm.
it's a great scene, and the Babe was definitely there, barnstorming and helping to
Yeah.
popularize the sport of baseball in Japan. So they knew, so and of course baseball really caught on in Japan. So yeah, they certainly knew who Babe Ruth was. But yeah, to
Mhm.
pick a baseball player as your symbol, to express contempt, but your symbol for the entire culture and the entire country, pick a baseball player, yeah, a retired baseball player at that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really shows the larger than life stature of Babe Ruth. It really is.
Yeah, I want to say one quote that the Los Angeles Times had around that era. They were talking about different kinds of heroes. It says um, it says in England, sorry, in England, the hero is an agreeable prince. In France, a general. In Russia, a bloodstained Bolshevik. In Italy, the leader of the fascists. And in the United States, a baseball player. This is the Los Angeles Times talking about, again, the status in the culture of what people recognize as or deem as heroes. So we get to 1946. Ruth develops throat cancer and diminishes over the next 2 years, loses a lot of weight, can't talk, and they have one more farewell for him in 1948. I think April 17th, same week Jackie Robinson, amazing. Same week Jackie Robinson is introduced to baseball is the famous Babe Ruth farewell, where anyone who knows baseball knows the classic photo with the number 3. He has the baseball bat, and you see the facade of Yankee Stadium. Right. And he goes over the PA and can hardly talk, but he thanks baseball for letting him, do what he loved for so long. And, then a couple of months later, he passes away, August 1948, and just tributes galore everywhere. St. Patrick's Cathedral, like 500,000 people came. They put the body in Yankee Stadium, and hordes of people came to see that. And so the legacy was, his. Now it's time to talk about what he meant, in the past tense to the sport and to, again, America. On his monument, it says, a great ball player, a great man, excuse me, and a great American.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm thinking here the contrast between Ruth and Lou Gehrig, the two icons from Murderers Row, because the Babe is the bad boy here. He's carousing all that. This is extraordinary, as we discussed, his extraordinary hedonistic appetites. Whereas Lou Gehrig was the good boy. He was a Boy Scout kind of person, very very honest, very virtuous, not a carouser, not cheating on his wife, and everything, and yet who becomes the icon? The bad boy, the hellraiser, from the time he was a kid was Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig was a college guy. Did he go to Columbia?
Columbia,
as I recall, and came out of a good family, and everything. It's an interesting contrast. The two big sluggers from the Murderers Row era of the Yankees. Very very different personalities and very different moral character. By the way, you've probably been there. There's this pizza place in Yonkers called Johnny's. Very famous for its thin crust pizza. It's delicious. Which reminds me, I haven't been there in years. I have to go there one of these days. But it's like a Yankee shrine. And there's this picture on the wall. I always gawk at it whenever I'm there, with Miller Huggins, the Yankees manager, flanked by the Babe and by Lou Gehrig. And Huggins was a small, slight kind of guy. He's with these two giants. But Lou, we need to do a hero show episode of Lou Gehrig also, because he was, what he did as a ball player and the way he faced death, and then the courage with which he faced death.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, Robin, the Babe was a big guy, although he had those slender legs. Lou Gehrig looks like he's just another species. His
sculpture
forearms, his forearms are bigger than Babe Ruth's thighs. It look like. I mean, he was. I forget. He was like listed like 6'1", 212. But I remember from my old basketball playing days, when you try to box somebody out under the boards, it's not necessarily the most muscular guys who are the strongest. It's the big bone guys, And Lou Gehrig had these gigantic bones, and you could see why old timers say he hit the ball harder than anybody. He did, a base hit that go not only between the infields, but then go hit so hard it go between it would split the outfield.
Gehrig deserves his own show. You're right, Andy, and there's a lot about that. I'll just say one just wrap the bow on him, because sadly he died even before Ruth. Yeah. And when they had the tribute for Gehrig on July 4th, we'd always watch every July 4th. We'd watch Pride of the Yankees. I talked about that this past weekend because it would always be on TV. And Gehrig's wife did not want Ruth, who was alive, to be in that film because he would overshadow Gehrig's day. You know, when they made the film of the Pride of the Yankees after that, and Gehrig, Ruth agreed to only be in like group shots. So here's the kind of the benevolence of Ruth, where he understands the hierarchy, that he doesn't have to be, especially in this sad occasion, be the center of attention. This is for somebody else. But yeah, polar opposite characters, and I agree. You remember when first New York Heroes event we had, Andy? We went to Ayn Rand Cemetery in Valhalla, New York, and we also went to Lou Gehrig's. We read because he's right near Gehrig and Rachmaninoff are the other two who are near, couple of 100 yards away from where Ayn Rand is buried. So I agree. Definitely look forward to talking about him in the future.
Gehrig was, very virtuous guy, great player, physical specimen. I mean, anybody got to go pilgrimage to Johnny's for the great pizza. Yeah. Look at that. Look at the bone structure of Lou Gehrig. It's just jaw dropping, And they were very different guys, great players. Didn't get along, for part of their careers. They, but
mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
that's not necessary. That's not necessary to win.
Yeah.
We know people have different characters, and
right. But Robert, you had the greatest quote of all time on this kind of issue. When we were talking about how the American founders, all giants, very often didn't like each other. We were talking about Leonardo and Michelangelo, both of whom we've done on the Hero Show, didn't like each other. And you said something like, the only place these great heroes get along is in Ayn Rand's novels.
Because they have the right moral code. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sadly true in so many cases, and Ruth and Gehrig were, two more examples of that. But so by the way, I should just point out, talking about Babe Ruth's legendary stature. The Baby Ruth candy bar, which the company claimed was, named after the daughter of former President Grover Cleveland Alexander. But everybody, back when I was a kid, thought that it was named after Babe Ruth. So I don't know. I don't even know what the truth is on that. I just everybody just assumed.
Yeah, there's a program called, I think, The Food That Built America on like the History Channel. And they talk about that. And basically, the proprietor, I can't remember his name, went to Ruth, but Babe Ruth wanted money. And so he just changed it to Baby Ruth, like he wanted, because Ruth was the most popular player on the planet. So he wanted to cash in on that. And Ruth, or his agent, that's the other thing. Ruth was the first one to have like a publicist and, a circus, a media circus around him. But yeah, in that sense, the Babe Ruth candy bar, which was another thing as a kid, I ate hundreds of those things, hoping I would become Babe Ruth. That's what kids do.
So was it really named after Babe Ruth, not after Grover?
Yes.
Not after President Grover Cleveland.
So once Ruth said no, they had to change the whole marketing pitch and come up with an excuse, and they cover that. And as I said, the show is called The Food That Made America, and it's like the Candy Wars or something is the episode. But Andy, just one last thing. One of the best books on baseball I've ever read is called The Glory of Their Times. Larry Ritter, in the early '60s, he interviewed dozens of baseball players who played from the dead ball era to the early 20s, and just to get their stories before it was too late. And unanimously, whenever they talk about Ruth, the same thing, likable guy, unpretentious, would help you out, prankster, not always, good fun if you're the butt end of it, but just one of a kind. Here's the thing. Nobody looked like him. Nobody acted like him. Babe Ruth was literally one of a kind. And, that's one reason I just feel like a hero for the ages.
Yeah, I agree. And one last point, tribute from one of his adversaries, and that was Ty Cobb, who, again, would have to be on anybody's short list of greatest players in history, and has been done a terrible injustice because the
I agree.
legends about that he was a racist and all these horrible things. The truth has finally been uncovered that Ty Cobb wasn't any of those things. Uh, and we can have a hero show episode on him. But he said, I can't use his language. Can't drop the F word on, but he
Yeah,
said he was surprised that that when Babe Ruth first came into the league, it was becoming a big star. He said, I thought he would eat, drink, and bleep his way, out of baseball, and he certainly ate, drank, and bleeped his way through baseball, but that he
yeah,
was able to perform, as we discussed, at this extraordinary high level while being this terrible heatheness. Even Ty Cobb, who was a carouser himself, even Ty Cobb and a bitter adversary, even Ty Cobb was impressed by that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
everybody knew the Babe was impressed by what he could do, especially
Yeah,
given his personality.
true. And they didn't like each other. They got into a fight actually in 1925. But Ruth had an answer to Cobb, who was the old school type of
Yeah.
baseball player. Ruth said, if I went around hitting those dinky singles, I could have batted 600. Okay. Instead of near 400, 350 something, but hitting 714 home runs. So my last thing, Randy, I want to say that my first goal in life was to play baseball. And although I didn't get to do it, I wasn't good enough to be on the Yankees. I did get to play on the Mets.
Yeah, all right.
You
All
remember
right.
that?
Yes, I do. I do remember that.
It
Congratulations
cost
to
me three
you.
thousand bucks, but I got to play on the Mets.
It's worth it. But there's a couple of last points about these baseball rivalries and
Yes,
the old school versus new school. Ty Cobb, great player, said, I could hit home runs too, if I swung for the fences. And then was
he
it like
did
the end of one season? End of one season, he showed it. He hit 3 home runs in a game and like
in a
five in a
doubleheader.
3-game
Yeah.
series.
Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
something like that. Show I can hit the ball out of the park too. But I'm not trying to. And Cobb to this day, but he would have hit 367 lifetime. I think some
Yeah,
extraordinary.
it's
It
yeah,
hit over 400 a number of times. But yeah, let's wrap it. Let me wrap it up with this about Ruth's power numbers. Yeah, when he hit, I think the Babe hit 344 lifetime. I think, which is extraordinary. But
yeah,
714 home runs, which was the major league career, which was the major league record until the great Hank Aaron broke it in the
yeah.
1970s.
Hmm.
2,213 RBIs, which was also the major league record until
Hmm.
Hank Aaron broke that. Ruth is still second, only to Hank Aaron in RBIs.
Hmm.
Like 90, almost 90 years after he retired. His slugging percentage lifetime was 690. If people don't know baseball, that it refers to how many of your base hits go for extra bases, right? Doubles, triples, home runs, how much power you hit for. You know what Babe Ruth's on base plus slugging percentage was lifetime, which is the god of all the metric, the metric,
Sabermetrics
the
now. Hmm.
Moneyball, yeah, the
Hmm.
sabermetric guys now. Babe Ruth's slugging percentage was 1,164. I mean, so his on base plus slugging. That's a major league record to this
Yeah.
day. Just you're right. That's the god figure. All the
Yeah.
sabermetric boys, the Moneyball
Yep.
guys. Which
Hmm.
which means if you were starting a baseball team today, you may well pick Babe Ruth as the first guy
Yes.
with that kind of slugging percentage, all-time major league record slugging percentage, all-time major league record on base
Hmm.
plus slugging, extraordinary power numbers.
Yep.
And maybe
56,
we should.
Andy. 56 records he held by the time he retired. Okay, so you don't need to know baseball specifically, but the man did something in 56 different categories better than anybody else before him. That's that's just
And,
if we look at that conceptually, it's just amazing.
right, and almost 100 years since his prime, if we consider
Yes.
1927 his prime year,
Hmm.
94 years since his prime, he still holds these slugging, all these slugging records. He is the greatest
Hmm.
slugger in history. Was a great pitcher. It absolutely boggles your mind. He's the goat. I agree with you, Rob. In
Yeah.
baseball, Babe Ruth is the goat. He's
Yeah.
he's the greatest of all time. Uh,
Hmm.
Yeah, and and some of those records stood for many, many years, and some of them
Hmm.
still stand. A
And the
14,
fact that
a
the fact
14.
that the Yankees, I'm sorry, Andy, just if we
Yeah,
go to today's era where the Yankees as a team are the most glorified sports franchise, before Ruth, they were nothing. So he was the
right.
linchpin for everything that they did. It's just amazing. Go ahead. I interrupted you though.
It is.
Finish off your.
It is amazing. Well, not no. He still holds all these batting records, and on top of that, if you ask like just a casual baseball fan, who holds the major league record for the longest complete game victory as a winning pitcher in a
Yeah,
World Series game?
yeah.
Yeah, who are they gonna say? Sandy Koufax. They're gonna guess. Some of these Lefty Grove, Bob Fella. The mentions Warren Spahn. Some of these great pitchers. But the answer to that question is Babe Ruth. So
Yeah.
I mean, it really is amazing the way he dominated this
Hmm.
sport. So
Hmm.
it's baseball season. I hope Babe
Yes.
Ruth's I hope Babe Ruth's team starts to hit. They have all these big Yankees and all these big hitters in their lineup who don't hit. And they're the biggest disappointment in baseball this season. So hopefully, the spirit of Babe Ruth will
Spirit of the
invigorate them,
Babe.
inspire
Yeah.
them.
Well,
Yeah, the spirit of
yes.
the Babe. So I want to salute Babe Ruth, as a towering hero in baseball and sports more broadly. I want to wish you, Robin, have a more heroic day, and everybody out there in Hero Land, have a heroic weekend, live a more heroic life, and we will see you next week again on the Hero Show, everybody.
Thank you, Andy. You too.